As California shuts its doors on SpaceX's ambitious launch plans, where can they go for their next space missions? Honestly, nowhere could be more ideal than the coast of Florida. What Florida's governor did is a big-time solution for SpaceX after facing pushback from what Cali's gov did over increasing their launch counts. Let's find out more in today's episode of Alpha Tech, and thank you again for always checking out our videos. All right, getting into it. The relationship between SpaceX and California's Coastal Commission is getting a lot more tense these days. The cause lies in the Commission's opposition to a plan by SpaceX and the U.S. Space Force to increase rocket launches at Vandenberg Air Force Base to up to 50 a year. In response, Elon's filed a lawsuit against the Commission, arguing that their decision was based on an unacceptable reason: his political comments on the X platform. This move appears to be based on personal bias, lacking consideration for the country's broader interests. Even California's Governor Gavin Newsom, who rarely aligns with Elon, said, "I'm with Elon" at a campaign event for Harrison Waltz in North Carolina. Moreover, this week, Elon and SpaceX got more attention from Washington. Congressman Vince Fong wrote his own letter to the CCC. "I have grave concerns over their decision, with commissioners citing personal animus to justify what should have been a non-political decision. As a member of Congress, I believe that government decisions should be made in a fair and impartial manner without regard to political views. In all my years in public service, I've never heard of a commission discussing politics as the basis for official action. This seems to be an egregious use of political discrimination to punish a specific company." With pressure coming from both the state and federal levels now, and from both parties, the CCC has remained quiet on the issue. Even worse for the CCC is that many other lawmakers will likely be supporting Elon's lawsuit after Election Day. I can't say who, but I do know of others here in Sacramento who will be writing to the CCC as well as once elections are done. Dana, a Capitol staffer, told the Globe on Thursday. "I know Newsom did it, but many don't want to be seen supporting Elon publicly, even if it's just for SpaceX launches until after the election. It's why you haven't seen other Democrats go after the CCC decision yet, and so many Republicans who have. And remember, it's because why some of the commissioners said no to the launches. They made it personal. You can't make decisions on a personal level. That's why lawyers and lawmakers recuse themselves from things they have a personal stake in or are related to somebody there or something like that." Aerospace consultant Miles Green added, "With the lawsuit, SpaceX can bring this back around, and all they have to do is show that SpaceX launches have military value. Rejections under that sort of basis are common enough, so you just bolster your next application and request." That decision making it personal was highly unusual, though. You can't get personal in decisions like that, and they did. With this momentum, it's likely Elon will have the advantage in the lawsuit. But even if increased Falcon 9 launches are eventually approved, we can't overlook the barriers that officials who oppose Elon might deliberately create. For this reason, SpaceX ought to consider which coastal locations would be more welcoming to their missions and rocket launches. And none other than Florida, the long-standing capital of U.S. rocket launches, offers SpaceX the ideal launch site. First, let's talk about the close, solid relationship between SpaceX's CEO Elon Musk and the head of the state of Florida. Musk has had a strong rapport with Governor Ron DeSantis. DeSantis holds SpaceX and Elon in high regard, consistently creating favorable conditions for the company's growth in Florida, even introducing legislation to further boost SpaceX's strength in the state. This support's made Florida a standout as a place where top aerospace companies find everything they need to turn their cutting-edge ideas into a reality. In Florida, aerospace companies have a footing in the new space economy or any aerospace market with direct access to established infrastructure, a skilled workforce, and an environment geared for innovation. Only Florida offers unmatched experience, exclusive financial tools, and a prime location over other regions. In appreciation of this support from Florida's leader, Elon has also shown an impressive attitude in return. Late last year, Governor DeSantis announced his bid for the 2024 Republican presidential race, and notably, he was joined and supported by Elon Musk. In November, Elon tweeted that he hoped that the next president would be somewhat sensible and centrist. He asked if he would support DeSantis, and he replied that he would. However, in 2024, dynamics shifted as DeSantis exited the presidential race, while Elon pivoted to support former President Donald Trump, who's considered DeSantis' biggest rival in the Republican nomination race. Does this mean their relationship is soured? Definitely not, as Governor DeSantis remains supportive of Trump's chances of winning the election, despite some differences in opinion. Elon has spoken positively about Florida's business environment. SpaceX has a big workforce on the Space Coast, with rocket manufacturing and launch facilities in Cape Canaveral. In 2021, Elon said he discussed with DeSantis reducing Miami traffic with tunnels built by his Boeing company. In 2022, following Hurricane Ian, Florida partnered with SpaceX to provide internet to severely impacted areas via Starlink. At this point, some might think that hurricanes are a bit of a downside to Florida, and that's not entirely wrong either, as Florida, being a tropical state, is prone to some severe storms. So why risk expensive equipment with the potential bad weather and even hurricanes? Well, first off, bad weather can happen anywhere, even on the West Coast, especially in Cali. You got earthquakes, while the Midwest has plenty of tornadoes. This reality means that not only does Florida, but all agencies and launch systems across the U.S. coast need to contend with nature's challenges, and contingency plans are always going to be in place for rocket launches. Of course, with these preparations, the weather shouldn't pose a challenge for SpaceX at this location. Besides the advantages mentioned earlier, Florida is just more convenient for launches because it's so close to the ocean. Launch site in Florida, Cape Canaveral, is located along the east coast of the U.S., so rockets can be safely launched to the east over the open waters of the Atlantic. If there's ever an issue with a rocket after liftoff, space flight operators can safely put it down in the Atlantic Ocean without endangering the public. Modern-day rockets are also comprised of multiple stages. When one stage runs out of fuel, it can shed from the rocket and fall into the ocean without harm. SpaceX has taken advantage of this, sending a floating platform out into the Atlantic where the first stage of its Falcon 9 rockets can land after sending the payload into space. Some rockets also come back to the Florida coast where they land not far away from where they blasted off moments prior. The other advantage that SpaceX has in increasing the launch rate is Florida's proximity to the equator. The west-to-east rotation of the Earth causes all points on Earth, except the poles themselves, to move eastward with some velocity. This eastward velocity is greatest at the equator, with the Earth rotating at a speed of roughly 1,040 miles an hour and decreases as you travel away from the equator, eventually reaching zero directly over either of the poles. SpaceX can take advantage of the Earth's natural rotation by launching eastward from Florida, specifically from Cape Canaveral. This speed at which the Earth rotates at Florida is roughly 914 miles an hour, helping give rockets a little extra boost to get to their destination. Now, while it's not impossible to launch rockets from higher latitudes, that extra speed boost from the Earth's rotation saves on fuel that could be used to help the rocket to get to the proper speed. And as a result, a rocket launching out of Florida can send a heavier spacecraft or satellite up into space. While Florida may be the best choice for SpaceX if rocket launches are limited in California, that move has its own challenges. SpaceX's competitors here are concerned about the increased activity the company could bring, especially with the Starship launches for which SpaceX is seeking FAA approval to conduct in Florida. This application is currently under review, allowing local businesses, organizations, and the public to share their views on the pros and cons of SpaceX's plans. And SpaceX's competitors are making their opposition clear. Blue Origin submitted a 3-page letter to the FAA asking for a cap on the number of launches and landings, requesting that the 44 planned launches be reduced to an unspecified number with minimal impact on the local environment, operating personnel, and the local community, as they put it. Blue Origin argues that SpaceX's safety margins overlap with the launch pads, hangars, and offices from other companies, including their own Launch Pad 36, all leased from Kennedy. ULA's criticisms go even further in a 22-page document submitted as part of the consultation process. They're accusing SpaceX of drafting their own environmental impact statement for their grandly named Starbase in Boca Chica, Texas, where they've been testing Starship. However, it appears that these companies are joining forces to attack SpaceX in an effort to reclaim their position in Florida and secure their interests. Both Blue Origin and ULA argue that SpaceX should compensate for potential risks associated with Starship launches. Both companies oppose Starship operations at Kennedy and believe that the rocket is too untested, too dangerous, and too disruptive to fit within the ecosystem of other users at Kennedy Space Center. The FAA is ultimately going to decide whether these concerns are valid and whether they are enough to prevent Elon and SpaceX from pursuing their Starship ambitions. In the global space industry landscape, SpaceX isn't the only player. However, over the past decade, SpaceX has established and maintained a substantial lead over the rest of the industry. This advantage comes not only from pioneering reusable rocket technology, which has significantly reduced launch costs, but also from its rapid pace of technological innovation and successful execution of complex missions. Notably, with a high launch frequency and success rate, SpaceX has set a new industry standard, forcing competitors to constantly chase after it but unable to bridge the gap. So the U.S. military recognizes this and seeks to maintain it by investing in SpaceX. They see it as an opportunity to continue America's technological lead over the competition. Even if ambitious concepts such as deploying space-based Marines via Starship in 30 minutes don't come to fruition, the U.S. military views investment in SpaceX as a relatively modest yet extremely effective means to maintain U.S. dominance in space and aerospace. Right now, U.S. military contracts civilian companies like SpaceX for launch services. For instance, back in 2020, SpaceX was awarded approximately 40% of the U.S. Space Force's launch service contracts through this year. The company's been heavily involved in launching U.S. military satellites using affordable platforms like Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy rockets. Most recently, Space Systems Command gave SpaceX a launch contract worth up to $733 million, covering 7 satellite launches for Space Development Agency's Data Relay Network and additional classified launches for the National Reconnaissance Office. SpaceX outcompeted 2 other companies to secure Lane 1 in the 3rd phase of the National Security Space Launch (NSSL) program, which was designed for high-risk, commercially modeled missions. The other 2 companies, United Launch Alliance and Blue Origin, are still certifying their new rockets to meet NSSL standards, making SpaceX's Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy the only proven workhorses and explaining why SpaceX accounted for 90% of U.S. launches in 2023. This illustrates the importance of SpaceX's development over the years, and the company's relationship with the U.S. military has only deepened. While some may not be happy about that, including the competition, as the Space Force allocates missions unevenly within the industry, SpaceX's superior capabilities are undeniable. Notably, just 3 days before getting awarded this valuable contract, SpaceX successfully caught the Super Heavy booster mid-air during Flight 5, a groundbreaking achievement previously unseen in the industry. This resounding victory is also a strong blow to the sentiments of U.S. military officials who were already interested in SpaceX's launch services and are now paying even closer attention to SpaceX, especially the company's Starship program. So, what features does Starship have that left most of the top U.S. military leaders in awe? Starship is quite different from any rocket coming before it. Once operational, its size, payload capacity, reusability, and the sheer number of vehicles planned for production is going to dwarf anything built over the last 70 years. First, we got to highlight Starship's capability for rapid transportation. The driving force behind this is the military's potential to use rockets to deliver supplies, possibly even troops down the road, anywhere in the world in under an hour. Pentagon officials began considering this idea 20 years ago, but it's only with the advent of Starship that this vision's become closer to reality. Envision a number of containers sitting in a warehouse down at Cape Canaveral. We go to an alert level, pull them up, you start putting them on the rocket, said Gregory Spaniers, chief scientist for the U.S. Air Force Research Lab. At each successive alert level, your time to launch shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and we can get it down to an hour. Spaniers and teams have already been making mock-ups of Starship's cargo bay, figuring out how to take advantage of a quick supply run. Speed is the obvious draw, but the cost is dropping and getting closer to existing expenses for moving supplies. The Starship Super Heavy system is going to be fully reusable, unlike any rockets flying right now. The Super Heavy booster, similar to SpaceX's current Falcon 9 fleet, comes back to the launch site. However, unlike Falcon 9, Super Heavy can be caught by the launch tower, stacked onto a new Starship, refueled, and then relaunched. Coupled with its design, Starship has really reduced costs for SpaceX. Now, we may already know about SpaceX's current fleet of Falcon 9s, with boosters initially designed for 10 flights, but potentially capable of reaching up to 40 flights. This innovation has driven launch costs down from approximately $4,500 to around $900 a pound. Falcon 9 right now can carry between 44,000 and 132,000 pounds. But Starship is a very different breed, said Gary Henry, senior advisor for national security space solutions at SpaceX. Starship is fundamentally designed for rapid reusability. We engineered the vehicle from the start to fly 100 times, not just 10, and it'll lift up to 250,000 pounds into LEO. He added that Starship will lower orbital cost to an initial $90 a pound, with Elon projected this dropping to $9 a pound in the future. If achieved, this would make a single Starship launch cost less than 1,000th of NASA's closest equivalent, the Space Launch System. This cost is nearly comparable to military supply missions using C-17s. Those Starship flights would take mere minutes instead of hours. Next is the launch frequency SpaceX has got planned for Starship. This frequency depends on building a huge fleet of Starships, with SpaceX envisioning the production of up to 1,000 Starships in various variants. Over the coming years, they plan to launch dozens, then hundreds, and ultimately thousands of Starships every year. Right now, SpaceX has one operational launch tower at Starbase in Texas and is building another one, Tower B. They are also constructing a Starship launch tower at the Kennedy Space Center. To meet its launch schedule, SpaceX will require multiple towers at launch sites in Texas, California, and Kennedy, with potential expansion to new sites to enable point-to-point delivery for the military's interest. But point-to-point cargo supply isn't the sole reason Space Force is interested in Starship. They're also checking out military applications for Starship in space. The ability to rapidly deploy cargo over long distances offers significant strategic advantages in the Indo-Pacific. As U.S. military officials foresee a potential high-stakes conflict in that region involving U.S. forces, which some have suggested could start up before 2026, Starship could undertake potentially sensitive and dangerous missions in a Pacific theater conflict. Coupled with short timelines of a launch from Cape Canaveral to Vandenberg or the Pacific Theater, Purdy previously said at the April 2023 Space Symposium that Starship's capacity really starts to open one eyes to think about how we can support an Indo-PACOM fight directly with a rocket cargo-type concept that comes back and lands on different islands. Other potential missions may include quickly launching satellites during a possible future war in space with a near-peer adversary like China or Russia, which is becoming an increasing concern in recent years given that space is now a highly contested environment. Rapid space access for replacing lost satellites and putting new capabilities in orbit during conflict has long been a major goal of the Pentagon. With Starship's heavy lift capabilities, it could deploy entire constellations of smaller satellites rapidly if needed. Independence of direct ownership would also mean DoD would have assured access to the capability outside the influence of corporate whims. However, this is something the head of SpaceX, Elon, does not fully agree with. Elon appears reluctant for his company's products to be used for purposes that might fuel warfare or conflict with other nations. For this reason, even the DoD's military interests, SpaceX and Elon would certainly want a degree of authority over Starship's missions. We've seen Elon previously restrict access to Starlink satellites in Ukraine as the technology was reportedly being used to support targets on Crimea, a decision that may still weigh on Pentagon planners. With high expectations around Starship testing in the coming months, it remains to be seen whether the U.S. military is genuinely going to speed up the logistical capabilities of space-based transportation in the future. In early 2022, the Air Force Research Lab awarded SpaceX a 5-year, $102 million contract to gather flight data from the Starship rocket program, aiming to demonstrate technologies for point-to-point cargo transport and humanitarian aid via Starship. While SpaceX has yet to successfully launch any payload on Starship, the program's progressing steadily along the company's proven path to success. Starship's Flight 5 mission managed to capture the Super Heavy booster with the chopsticks, and just a month out, they're going to be conducting Starship Flight 6, signaling growing confidence in the rocket catch system, a critical component for fully reusables and a trend shaping today's competitive launch market. Next year, SpaceX is set to see a surge in Starship launches as the Star Factory runs smoothly and Launch Tower B at Starbase becomes operational. I can barely imagine how magnificent these modern spectacles are going to be, undoubtedly setting a model standard. The Air Force expects to fully demonstrate the cargo rocket concept by 2026. Recent comments emphasize that if this does become a reality, the Pentagon views owning Starship as a significant future priority. As we dive into SpaceX's rapid development journey, one thing stands out above all, and that is speed. Speed in innovation, speed in execution. The impressive reality is that even before completing the test flights of Starship version 1, version 2 is already moving closer to the perfection of the hardware technology with this futuristic rocket design. We'll get into the new upgrades that SpaceX has implemented for Starship and examine how these improvements will impact space exploration in this new era. So let's set aside the achievements of Starship's version 1 over the last year, because spaceship Starship V2 is getting more looks than ever before. Recently, in a surprising move, Ship 33 was brought out and underwent 2 full cryogenic proof tests at Massey. After completing these tests and providing valuable data for SpaceX's engineering team, Ship 33 returned to the production facility on November 2nd for analysis. The movement and testing of the ship are noteworthy, but what initially grabs our attention and piques our curiosity are the visible upgrades on this V2. The updated design represents a major step forward in SpaceX's goal of making Starship the most powerful reusable launch vehicle on the planet. Called Starship Block 2, Ship 33 includes many design improvements over previous Block 1 versions. While Block 1 ships were focused on early testing and proof of concept missions, Block 2 starships use lessons learned from earlier flights and introduced new hardware configurations. These changes aim to increase efficiency, reliability, and compatibility with updated booster models. For instance, the flight termination system on Block 2 has been redesigned for a quicker response time and better integration with other systems on board, which is essential for safe aborts during launch and landing. The heat shield design has also been refined. Aligning with Elon Musk's vision, is now thinner and lighter, yet twice as durable as the previous heat shield. Additionally, Block 2 ships no longer have the large temporary stringers seen on Block 1, and that's a smoother, more efficient exterior. With such hardware improvements, close monitoring by SpaceX is essential. Cryogenic tests, including filling both tanks with super cold liquid nitrogen to simulate launch conditions, allows engineers to identify leaks, assess structural integrity, and ensure that the system can withstand the pressures of spaceflight. After completing several rounds of cryogenic testing, the new Starship moves on to engine installation and further preparations for flight. Now, some people are wondering when this ship's going to be ready to fly. And that's a tough question to answer because in the past, ships typically need up to 8 months to complete engine installation, testing, and then other final preparations before the actual flight. However, it remains unclear whether this ship will take less or more time to do all that. If you have any predictions, let us know down there in the comments below. We'd love to see what you're thinking. Another extremely important change in Starship V2, which we'll get into further in this video, is the nose cone on Ship 33. Alright, so alongside improved smoothness through refined wells and reduced bracing, the flaps are the most noteworthy feature right here. Another extremely important change in Starship V2, which I'll discuss further now, is the nose cone on Ship 33. Alongside the smoothness that got improved from refined wells and reducing the bracing, the flaps are perhaps the most noteworthy feature. At first glance, Starship V2 looks a bit bulkier than V1, but in reality, the flaps have actually been scaled down, aligning with Elon's statement a couple years back saying forward flaps will change a lot in upcoming versions of Starship, smaller and more leeward. However, despite that early discussion, this new flap design was not implemented on later V1 models. After encountering issues with the flaps during Flight 4, this updated design has finally made its debut. Elon explained further that the newer version of Starship relocates the forward flaps to improve reliability, ease of production, and enhance orbital payload capacity. Also, Elon gave more context. "I'm so glad we finally fixed the forward flap design. The old one was killing me. It was too large and heavy, positioned at 180 degrees, causing issues during the high heating hypersonic phase of the flight. The new design solves those problems." So, what advantages has this new design brought to SpaceX's Starship? While the forward flaps on V2 are smaller, they reduce aerodynamic drag, impacting navigation and the critical flip maneuver during landing. This minimizes damage risk in flight and simplifies production, increasing flexibility in operations. In terms of shape, the edges of the flaps have been adjusted to improve aerodynamic performance. The positioning has been optimized by moving them closer to the top of the vehicle, enhancing directional control during flight. Unlike the previous version, where flaps were symmetrically placed at a 180-degree angle, the new config shifts the flaps into airflow at about 120 to 140 degrees. This repositioning gives better protection during re-entry, reducing the likelihood of damage as seen in Flight 4. These modifications are expected to improve the efficiency of one of Starship's most sensitive systems, making future flights safer and more predictable. If SpaceX successfully achieves efficient operation of the upgrades in V2, we will not doubt the complete reusability of Starship. So, what difference would it make in the industry if SpaceX hits full reusability with Starship? Remember, NASA's space shuttle also designed to be fully reusable, but the key here is the turnaround time and costs associated with each launch. It typically takes up to 9 months to disassemble and refurb the engines, not to mention the cost and time to replace thermal shields. This caused the shuttle's cost to skyrocket, even compared to similar expendables. This was also one of the reasons why the shuttle program couldn't continue at that time. For SpaceX, launching Starship quickly in the future to reduce costs is an essential goal that needs to be achieved. And this has an advantage that no other rocket in the world can compete with. The cost has been a major barrier limiting access to space. Since the 1950s, the cost of traditional space programs made it inaccessible for most countries just because it was so high. Although SpaceX isn't the only private company doing launch services, it's emerged as one of the most important. These days, humans will have more opportunities to get to space thanks to Starship. And this isn't just leaps and bounds that only billionaires can do, but it's actually an opportunity for all of us. Elon announced a target to bring the cost of launching Starship down to 10 mil a launch, a surprisingly low figure. However, with Elon at the helm, it's almost certain that SpaceX will achieve this goal by any means necessary. Besides, Starship is the largest launch system ever developed, and when fully operational, it should be able to take up to 200 tons into orbit, an impressive payload. For comparison, SpaceX's Falcon 9, the company's reliable workhorse, can carry up to 50,000 pounds to LEO per launch. This difference enables significant economies of scale as bigger payloads can get launched at once, which allows customer companies to save on payload preparation costs. Now, historically in spaceflight, payloads have been miniaturized to fit on rockets, and that's upped the cost. But with Starship, however, that paradigm can be reversed. Instead of spending heavily to shrink and miniaturize technology, customers can use larger, more standard components, reducing development costs. And Starship offers the flexibility to use off-the-shelf solutions without the expense and limitations of miniaturization. Starship will have an immediate impact once orbital testing is completed and safety certifications obtained. Launching satellites and resupply missions to the IS will be the first step, followed by getting humans beyond Earth to the moon and out to Mars. As early as the year after next, Starship is slated for a moon mission under a contract with NASA. Their reusability and cost savings align with NASA's goal of establishing a human presence on the moon, making it a stepping stone for other planets in the future. Moreover, Starship itself is going to be the first outpost on these distant planets. Government planners won't have to worry too much about the emergence of Starship, as it'll serve a home on the moon or on Mars. Beyond interplanetary aspirations, Starship also revolutionizes transportation on Earth. With its enormous capacity and rapid speed, the new version of Starship will expand transportation opportunities from one place to another, reducing transit times between distant points, of course with a reasonable price, and Starship being available to everyone, whether government or private entities. Now, of course, cheaper payloads into space also lead to more affordable orbital tourism. Sweet! First, commercial orbital stations will create more opportunities to host said tourists. Second, tourists will be able to go on the Starship itself, and then there are already such contracts. For example, the Polaris program, Jared Isaacman, the billionaire founder, has purchased as many as 3 more flights from SpaceX. The first mission, known as Polaris Dawn, launched a 4-person crew led by Jared Isaacman using the Falcon 9 rocket crew and Crew Dragon spacecraft. Polaris Dawn is going to be one of up to 3 planned missions, with the final one to be the first crewed spaceflight of SpaceX's Starship rocket. Each such new rocket system makes space a little more accessible to each of us, and the time is not so far away when flights into space will be as affordable as getting on a regular airplane. That's pretty cool, yeah? But in reality, as Starship continues to get upgrades, it's going to be even more advantageous than we already think. These are going to be important steps for Starship to get closer to hitting those milestones. It will not only reinforce SpaceX's dominance, but also be a huge benefit for NASA and the space industry. It can be said that changes with Starship are truly breaking every record we can think of. Not simply the limit of the size of the rocket, it's going to be the limit of exploration that humans aim for. Starship's 5th flight is one of the keys to unlocking many exciting developments, including the HLS Starship variant, a lunar lander in the Artemis program. Honestly, it'd be a mistake to think it'll be a long time before Starship makes the journey to the moon. In fact, SpaceX and NASA have recently revealed an important detail about the living spaces inside the HLS Starship that we never saw before in preparation for the historic flight at the end of 2026. At this point, many people might be curious about what SpaceX has achieved with the HLS Starship beyond the incremental progress being made in Starship's V1 testing. How ready is SpaceX for a lunar mission? Has the crew habitat inside Starship been finished yet? That seems to be the most common questions these days. However, no need to worry. These concerns only scratch the surface of what SpaceX has publicly shared. In reality, they've achieved much more than what they've told us. SpaceX has a tradition of fast-paced, agile work, often tackling multiple tasks in parallel with precision. While Starship's test flights are ongoing, SpaceX has been working with NASA to conduct vacuum tests, elevator trials for the lander, vacuum Raptor engine tests, and docking system trials that'll eventually connect the HLS Starship with the Orion and Gateway orbiting the moon. There have been remarkable advances these days. Even as Starship achieves new milestones, SpaceX has not lost focus of the Lunar Lander project. In fact, they've even intensified their efforts. Ken Kojaki, Deputy Director of NASA's HLS Program Office at Marshall Space Flight Center recently shared in an interview, "I could see SpaceX innovation, and I could see that we're not just dictating things when they have better ideas. We haven't hemmed them in. And until now, the life compartment of the HLS Starship has been revealed." We also looked at the crew cabin to mock up the visuals of some of the sleeping quarters, the lab, and everything that's being built as mock-ups in Boca Chica. It's sitting at Boca Chica right now. Now, for those who might not remember, around mid-last year at Starbase, a nose cone from Starship 22 appeared with features resembling a laboratory for the Starship's human landing system. The nose cone was painted white on one side, recalling concept illustrations of the lunar lander. The flaps were removed, giving it a bare appearance. Additionally, we could see electronic panels and a fabric-sealed door allowing access to the model's inside. For those who were curious then, now SpaceX had inadvertently revealed more about it during the live broadcast of Starship flight, lending credibility to the confirmation by the Deputy Program of the Human Landing System Program Office's confirmation. This image seems to show a crew compartment with an outer access door. Though it looks simple, SpaceX has previously stated that it'll prioritize optimized space usage without compromising aesthetics or functionality. Now, as we can see, the clean black and white tones in the compartment match the HLS Starship and SpaceX's Starman suit colors. There's also a computer screen along with the strategically arranged buttons that suit large gloves, looking very modern. Honestly, even from the small view, we can feel the futuristic trend that SpaceX is bringing. Although there aren't many images of this, we know that SpaceX has completed the development of crew cabins, sleeping quarters, and a science lab mock-up inside the nose cone. In the near future, let's look forward to seeing how SpaceX continues to develop and complete other parts of the crew compartment, particularly how they apply their futuristic design style. But that's not all for SpaceX. SpaceX and Axiom Space recently completed the first Artemis 3 integration tests, marking the first time since the Apollo program that a pressure simulation was conducted in the HLS's Starship airlock while NASA astronauts wore Axiom's spacesuit. These are exciting images showcasing how far SpaceX has come with this mission. NASA and Axiom have also done everything possible to support SpaceX along the way. Ken Kojaki remarked, "The next time we'll really have a chance to look at it as a whole is we're getting a design update from SpaceX to review in November, and then we'll be able to look at it at the critical design review next year." Everything's getting prepared for the Artemis 3 mission slated for 2026. Although time's tight, this will certainly be a pivotal moment in space exploration history. The HLS Starship will play a key role in transferring the crew from Orion to the lunar surface. Its spacious pressurized cabin, advanced navigation and control technology will ensure a safe and precise landing, creating a stunning spectacle. Chukanki put it, "I think that the day that Starship lands on the moon, that we have something of this size coming in and landing vertically, the crew exiting, taking the elevator down to the surface and exploring the surface, I think that for me is what I'm looking forward to." The lunar program's development is progressing clearly and rapidly. Looking back, SpaceX has reached many achievements in its pursuit of these missions. As noted in a NASA press release, since being selected to land humans on the moon since the first time since Apollo, SpaceX has reached more than 30 specific milestones for the HLS. These include the identification and testing of essential hardware for power generation, communications, navigation, propulsion, life support, and space environment protection. The final hurdle for Starship is its reusability and habitable space capabilities. Once achieved, it'll be ready to become the first spacecraft to land on the moon. If SpaceX's Starship can land on the moon, then it can take humans there too. In fact, with its exceptional power and synthesis capability, it'll make NASA's mission not even need the Space Launch System and Orion at all. So, why doesn't NASA just abandon these expensive and seemingly redundant intermediate vehicles? First, the technical side. While SpaceX has shown it can reliably land the booster stage of its Falcon 9 rocket upright, the spent booster stage doesn't currently land with a heavy pressurized crew compartment on top of it. Starship, meanwhile, is an order of magnitude bigger than the Falcon 9 and is still trying to perfect a landing on Earth. Its booster, Super Heavy, has yet to fly. NASA's not yet ready to launch its astronauts on such a new system, though that could change. Additionally, vehicles returning to Earth from the moon hit the atmosphere at much higher speeds than they do when returning from Earth's orbit. NASA's Orion crew capsule, which uses legacy heat shield technology that dates back to the Apollo days, successfully tested a high-speed reentry during its 2014 test flight. The gargantuan Starship vehicle belly flopped through the atmosphere, taking a page out of the Space Shuttle's playbook. Starship has yet to successfully land from Earth orbit, let alone lunar orbit. And that brings us to the second reason: politics. SLS and Orion were written into U.S. law by the Senate in 2010 NASA authorization bill and employ tens of thousands of people in every state. Congressional support for the project has been strong over the years, even as projects have delayed their schedules and blown their original projections. By merely flirting with non-SLS options for sending humans to the moon, as former NASA Administrator Jim Burdenstein did 2 years ago, the agency incited the wrath of some powerful senators. The current plan for Artemis is thus an artful mix of political and technological compromises. Every major NASA contractor participates in the program, as will the agency's major international partners through the Gateway program. Artemis comprises both classic cost-plus contracts and new fixed-price contracts for its major components, with jobs distributed around the country. It's the inevitable outcome for a large project that depends on discretionary spending overseen by a representational political system. But one thing that can't be denied, SpaceX's Starship is becoming prominent above everything else. SpaceX is revolutionizing rocket technology with its fully and rapidly reusable Super Heavy lift vehicle, which challenges the competitiveness of almost all other rockets. For instance, SpaceX's plan to deploy 400 Starlink satellites into orbit per launch, with most of this cost attributed to propellant, presents a formidable challenge to competitors. Existing expendable rockets worldwide simply can't match the cost-effectiveness of Starship. Furthermore, companies or countries aiming to develop fully reusables are significantly behind SpaceX and are struggling to catch up as SpaceX continues to advance. Beyond its technological significance, Starship holds immense historical importance. Starship marks a turning point for humanity as we embark on the journey to colonize other celestial bodies. Its significance rivals that of any great moment of exploration and settlement in history. While the Super Heavy booster catch during Starship's Flight 5 was celebrated across the world, this impressive maneuver actually faced some pretty big challenges behind the scenes. So, how did SpaceX and Elon reveal the realistic new catching data is something weird, nearly disastrous? Mechazilla's catching problem and how SpaceX is going to fix it in Flight 6. So SpaceX's historic catch earlier this month was even more dramatic than we thought. During the mission's fifth test, October 13th, the massive Super Heavy booster, the first stage of Starship, seemed to complete a flawless return back to Earth. The rocket positioned itself gracefully next to its launch tower where the chopstick arm successfully caught and secured it, a maneuver that looked seamless to us onlookers. However, behind this seemingly smooth operation lay a heart-stopping reality. In a recent conversation between Elon and SpaceX engineers, it was revealed that the Super Heavy booster was mere seconds away from aborting its tower landing attempt. In a recorded conversation, an unnamed engineer described an issue related to the booster's landing burn where a misconfigured parameter, likely involving spin pressure in the booster's Raptor engines, failed to increase as expected. Spin pressure is critical for the operation of the turbo pump, which supplies propellant to the engine's combustion chamber. A malfunction in this system could lead to disaster during the landing burn by disrupting engine control. We were 1 second away from that tripping and telling the rocket to abort and try to crash into the ground next to the tower, the engineer said. Such a scenario would erroneously tell a healthy rocket to avoid the catch attempt. The situation came extremely close to triggering an abort sequence with just 1 second left. The abort sequence would have directed the rocket to crash into a designated area near the launch tower rather than attempting a landing. This is especially concerning since the abort would have been triggered on what was described as a healthy rocket, meaning the abort criteria itself may have had a flaw rather than the vehicle. We had a whole bunch of new abort and commit criteria that we tried to double-check thoroughly. But I think our concern was well-placed, and one of those things came very close to biting us, the engineer continued. This comment highlights significant internal concerns about verification procedures for the new abort and commit criteria. Additionally, the team had already identified potential issues, but may have been limited by other factors, possibly schedule pressures, in fully addressing them as desired. The recording mentions discussions about delaying Flight 5's launch to allow extra time to check the parameters. We were worried about the fact that we had 100 aborts that were not trivial, one person said. In the audio, SpaceX officials noted that they completed a review the day before using data from Flight 5 to compare against the aborts and what we need to change on them. This illustrates the high level of pressure SpaceX's engineering team faced in deciding to catch Super Heavy. On one hand, SpaceX wanted to delay Flight 5 to ensure safety margins were adequate, but on the other, they faced pressure from the launch schedule. Fortunately, everything went relatively smoothly, and the thorough post-flight analysis was conducted quickly, with the team reviewing Flight 5's data and comparing it to the abort criteria. This indicates a strong focus on learning from experience and implementing improvements for future flights, which is going to be especially relevant for Starship's 6th test flight. Another issue discussed in the recording while Musk was playing a video game involved a coating on a chime, a vertical structure on the booster that peeled off when the vehicle was flying at supersonic speeds during descent. A SpaceX official on the recording said that the peeling chine cover was a concern they had before the launch. We wouldn't have predicted the exact right spot, but the cover that ripped off was directly over several single-point failure valves that must work during the landing burn, they said. Thankfully, none of those valves or the harnessing were damaged, but we ripped this chine cover off over some really critical equipment just as the landing burn was starting. We have a plan to address that. This discussion likely continued on topics related to engine plume flow during descent, but the video cuts off there. However, not to worry about this, SpaceX will likely release more info on this soon. All these insights will provide SpaceX with valuable data to replicate this awesome maneuver on the next test flight, Flight 6. This showcases just how difficult the tasks SpaceX is undertaking really are, highlighting the level of grandeur that not just any company or even large space agencies can achieve. With Elon's promise on X, Flight 6 coming up soon, we can soon expect to see this spectacular catch performed again, even more perfectly and precisely. So, is there any issue with the license for Starship 6 flight? Good question. SpaceX has already received FAA approval for the next Starship flight as part of the license update for the previous Flight 5, meaning that they don't need to go through the typical last-minute FAA approval process before the launch, giving them more flexibility. The SpaceX team indicated that they are focusing on booster risk reduction for the next flight, rather than further expanding the Starship envelope. They're trying to find a balance between risk mitigation and speed since they're no longer constrained by the typical FAA approval timeline. One engineer commented that they are taking as much time as they might ideally want to thoroughly study everything, but given this, it'll be the first Starship flight not driven by FAA requirements. They're aiming for a reasonable balance of speed and risk mitigation on the booster. This suggests SpaceX wants to move quickly with the next Starship test flight while still implementing additional risk reduction measures on the booster compared to previous launches. Having the FAA approval on hand already gives them more scheduling flexibility to focus on operational improvements. SpaceX needs to ramp up its test launches in the near future, and having the support of government agencies to facilitate launches is crucial. This urgency comes as China's space program, America's primary competitor, is steadily making strides in their own space ambitions. Although the total number of launches from Chinese companies may never match SpaceX's, China's lunar exploration efforts appear to be progressing smoothly. Meanwhile, the U.S. moon program is facing delays, partly due to setbacks with spacesuits and lunar landing vehicles. In contrast, China's committed to landing astronauts on the moon by 2030, and they've got a pretty good track record of meeting their deadlines. Just a few years ago, such a scenario seemed impossible, but now the prospect of China catching up to the U.S. in a race that the U.S. essentially defined feels pretty plausible. China's space program is advancing rapidly, with few significant setbacks or delays. In April, Chinese space officials announced that they're on track to put astronauts on the moon by the end of the decade. That's remarkable progress for a country that first sent an astronaut to space back in 2003. Now, since 2011, China has operated space stations and achieved some impressive milestones through Chang'e's lunar exploration program. These robotic missions have returned samples from the moon's surface, including the far side, and have tested technology crucial for crewed landings. The next mission will land at the South Pole, a region of high interest due to the presence of water ice in dark craters. This water could be used to sustain a lunar base and produce rocket fuel, which would be far cheaper than transporting fuel from Earth, making lunar exploration more feasible. For similar reasons, NASA's Artemis III also aims to land at the South Pole, which is planned to host bases led by both the U.S. and China. On September 28th, China unveiled a lunar spacesuit designed for its selenots, or lunar explorers. The suit, light and flexible, is crafted to protect against extreme temperature shifts and unfiltered solar radiation. Could this indicate that China's pulled ahead of the U.S. in one aspect of the moon race? Meanwhile, Artemis's moon suit manufacturer Axiom Space is revising parts of NASA's initial design. Additionally, during Artemis I, Orion's heat shield sustained significant damage upon re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere. NASA engineers are working to address this before the Artemis II mission. Time is running out for these missions amid delays NASA and its contractors need to address. But for SpaceX, things are different. They may be the key to redefining space travel, and the only ones capable of locking down a win for the U.S. In 2021, SpaceX got a contract to build the lunar landing vehicle based on its Starship, a 50-meter spacecraft launched by the most powerful rocket ever made. On October 13th, Starship successfully completed its fifth test flight. However, before a crewed Starship can deliver astronauts to the moon, several challenging steps remain. Starship can't fly directly to the moon. It first needs to refuel in Earth orbit using other starships as tankers. SpaceX has to demonstrate in orbit refueling and conduct an uncrewed lunar landing before Artemis 3 can proceed.
SpaceX had the very successful fifth launch as they developed this very large rocket that has about 16 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. And this was another one of the steps in the iteration of developing that, of which they will join us in lunar orbit.
Well, flattering words from the NASA administrator are not merely compliments, they are proud acknowledgments of SpaceX's victory. Perhaps at this stage, NASA's got to admit that only SpaceX, and specifically the magnificent Starship, is truly worthy of being the heir to the American space dream. And maybe it's precisely because of this that right after Starship's successful launch, NASA made its critical decisions regarding Boeing's Starliner. On the other hand, ULA, that's United Launch Alliance, they also could not escape their unfortunate fate. Just 5 days after the successful launch of Starship, NASA delivered some rather disappointing news for Starliner. While I don't want to speculate that these two events might be related, the reality is kinda undeniable. It's no coincidence that NASA made this decision at this particular time. SpaceX's success hit NASA like a psychological blow, pushing them to make a definitive decision, and Boeing can't deny its failure in comparison to their rival. A smart move, too, by NASA, as they don't want to sour their long-term partnership with Boeing. On October 15th, NASA announced that it would use Crew Dragon for both the Crew 10 mission of the ISS, scheduled no earlier than February of next year, and the Crew 11 mission planned for no earlier than July, meaning Boeing Starliner's first mission will be delayed from Feb to August 2025, with Crew 10 moved up to February. NASA also said it would prepare Crew 11 alongside Starliner 1 for a launch around August of next year. This result is pretty bad for Boeing. All their efforts seem to have been in vain, as they now face rejection from NASA, along with the humiliation of being overshadowed by the young guns in the industry. NASA will use SpaceX's Crew Dragon for 2 rotating missions to send crews up to the ISS next year, while continuing to evaluate whether Boeing needs to conduct additional test flights for the Starliner. The timing and configuration of Starliner's next flight will be determined once a better understanding of Boeing's path to system certification is established, NASA said in its statement about the 2025 missions. NASA's keeping options on the table for how to best achieve system certification, including windows of opportunity for a potential Starliner flight in 2025. Of course, this outcome is a result of Boeing's own mistakes, and they have no one to blame but themselves. Earlier this year, NASA hoped Boeing's CST-100 Starliner would be certified in time for a mission early next year, but issues with the Crew flight test mission that got launched back in June with NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams aboard led NASA to conclude in July that the spacecraft would not get certified in time. Today, NASA has not given any updates on the review process for Starliner's crew test flight mission, which concluded September 7th with an uncrewed landing in New Mexico. NASA previously determined it'd be safer for Wilmore and Williams to come back on the Crew 9 Dragon mission in early 2025. By the time Starliner returns, officials said that they might be able to proceed directly to Starliner 1, even though the spacecraft faced issues with thrusters and helium leaks. It's under data review. We need to make a decision. Do we need another test flight? NASA Deputy Administrator Pam McElroy said when asked about the status of Starliner's review at a presser during the International Astronautical Congress event on October 16th, adding that there was no timeline for completing that data review. This remains a rather vague scenario, similar to the resolution process for the Starliner crew earlier in June, only deepening the uncertain future of Boeing's space program, which now seems increasingly trapped in a downward spiral. The company's been struggling with massive losses, particularly with Starliner's program, which has been limping forward. The company revealed in a regulatory filing that the latest setback with Starliner led to a $125 million loss through June 30th, pushing cumulative cost overruns on the program to over $1.5 billion. Risk remains that we may record additional losses in future periods, Boeing stated. Of course, these figures might seem insignificant compared to Boeing's nearly $78 billion in revenue last year. But combined with the sudden and widespread decline that Boeing's facing, it's creating a deep chasm that the company's sliding into. In just the second quarter this year alone, the company recorded a $1 billion loss from fixed price government contracts like those with NASA and the Pentagon. We have a couple of fixed price development programs we just have to finish and never do them again, then CEO David Calhoun said last year. Never do them again. For fixed price contracts, no matter how much they spend on the project, NASA pays them the same amount. Not to mention Boeing's other problems like laying off 17,000 employees or 10% of its global workforce just recently. As the company explained, this was to align with our financial reality and a more focused set of priorities. Workers likely hope this won't mark the start of a trend, especially as the Starliner program faces the risk of cancellation. There's no doubt that if Boeing can't continue making money off the program, cancellation is inevitable. Besides Boeing's Starliner struggles, ULA's Vulcan is also in a rather grim situation. It was expected that the successful launch of Vulcan twice in orbit would give ULA a big boost in securing lucrative contracts, but the surprising truth is that ULA's outcome has not changed. U.S. Space Force gave a massive $733 billion contract to SpaceX instead. Essentially, the military seems to trust SpaceX's mature Falcon 9 and Heavy programs compared to the Vulcan rocket. Moreover, it appears that SpaceX's rockets have a pricing advantage when it comes to the government. The starting price for a Vulcan launch is $110 million, half the cost of its predecessor, the Atlas V, which had been the foundation of ULA's dominance in U.S. national security sat launches since ULA got founded back in 2006. On the other hand, SpaceX's reusable Falcon 9 is priced at $67 million a launch. Now, these prices can fluctuate depending on the mission, but the fact that SpaceX got this launch contract suggests that the price they offered for each mission is lower than that of the competition. More significantly, once SpaceX's gigantic Starship booster gets operational, it'll be much easier to carry larger payloads than Vulcan, and the cost per pound will be even lower than that of Falcon 9 since Starship's going to be fully reusable. So, why hasn't ULA moved towards reusability with a Vulcan rocket? Okay, to be honest, a few years ago, ULA introduced their SMART plan, which involves recovering only the engine section of the Vulcan rocket. This was presented as an innovative way to cut costs, but it seemed more like an attempt to show Congress that the ULA was working on cost-saving measures for the future, even though the concept always appeared to offer limited benefits. ULA also collaborated with NASA to test an inflatable hypersonic decelerator. They proposed using a helicopter to capture the Vulcan engine section in midair, a technique that Rocket Lab's already pioneering with the first stage of their Electron rocket. However, the idea has not had a chance to be implemented because of the delays of the Vulcan rocket, causing these plans to seemingly become forgotten. Why didn't ULA pursue these reusables before SpaceX showed up? ULA had a monopoly on the U.S. government launch contracts, which provided them with more than enough money. As a result, they had little interest in entering the commercial launch market, where they were generally too expensive to compete. The government's Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle (EELV) program paid ULA twice for each launch, once through an annual payment that pre-purchased the boosters they'd build, and again for the actual launch services needed to get the boosters to orbit. This system made it unnecessary for ULA to explore other markets or more cost-effective technologies. For example, the Delta IV Heavy production line has remained active simply because there are several boosters left in the queue that the government has already paid to be built. This sweetheart deal gave ULA no incentive to innovate or cut costs. Government contracts, they were the core of ULA's business. The traditional way to get such contracts is to maintain strong relationships with Congress that controls the funding. ULA achieved this by donating to political campaigns and employing large numbers of workers in key congressional districts. They spread booster construction across the various locations throughout the U.S. and relied on numerous subcontractors, ensuring that many congressmen and constituents benefited. However, this approach also increased the final cost of the launch vehicles. Even if ULA had developed reusables, this would have reduced the number of boosters they needed, leading to fewer jobs and weakening their political leverage with Congress. Fewer workers in these districts means less influence in getting future contracts. So reusable boosters would have undermined ULA's business model and likely reduced profits, giving them little incentive to pursue reusability. Ultimately, their financial dependence on government contracts and the need to maintain congressional support has made the pursuit of reusable rockets less appealing to ULA. However, it turns out that this has become a weakness in competing with other launch vehicles from the competition. Perhaps they'll need to consider returning to a reusable method of their own. In recent days, there have been numerous rumors that Starliner's program may be terminated by its own creator, Boeing. The reason cited is the accumulating technical difficulties surrounding the spacecraft, which is gradually getting outdated. Stalemate is indeed the perfect term to describe Boeing's Starliner program at this point. But is abandoning Starliner really the course of action Boeing's planning? How did Elon react? Recently, Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, joined his first quarterly conference call with investment analysts. Facing criticism from labor groups and regulators, Boeing reported a substantial $6.2 billion loss over the last 3 months, with a new chief pledging to revive the struggling aerospace giant. A significant aspect of the financial strain stems from recurring losses on Boeing's Starliner program, which added another $250 million this quarter, bringing the total losses for the program to about $1.8 billion. These costs have accumulated over recent years due to ongoing technical issues and delays. Under a fixed-price contract with NASA, Boeing's Starliner requires the company to absorb any cost overruns. While this type of contract protects the government from excess spending, it puts a financial burden on the contractor, in this case Boeing. Unfortunately for them, Starliner's costs have consistently exceeded initial projections, requiring the company to cover additional expenses to bring the spacecraft to operational readiness. Since the last Starliner test flight ended in disappointment, Boeing's given little info on the spacecraft's future plans. Following Starliner's landing in early September, the company issued only a brief written statement indicating that management would review data and determine the next steps for the program. Adding to Boeing's woes, Starliner's imperfect test flight has caused NASA to delay the program's next planned flight to the International Space Station. Originally, NASA wanted Starliner's first operational flight early next year, but the agency has since scheduled 2 additional crewed missions with SpaceX's spacecraft for 2025. Once again, NASA finds itself relying on a more dependable commercial partner, SpaceX. It's undeniable that SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft has done 43 visits to the ISS since 2019, carrying both crew and cargo for NASA. Even when Starliner faced issues, SpaceX stepped in as a partner to resolve the situation, helping rescue 2 Americans stranded at the space station after Starliner's malfunction forced NASA to order the craft to return to Earth empty. All this has sparked doubt among space enthusiasts regarding the future of Boeing's Starliner, which has repeatedly faced setbacks. So, could Boeing abandon the Starliner program? Given the current trajectory of the Starliner project, there seems little reason for Boeing to continue investing in a space program that has yet to turn a profit and instead adds to their financial losses. Additionally, Boeing and Lockheed Martin have been seeking a buyer for United Launch Alliance, with potential buyers like Blue Origin and Sierra Space rumored to show interest. That makes sense for Boeing to divest from Starliner, which has so far cost them millions of dollars and damaged their long-standing rep in the space industry. Boeing's current leadership culture also appears ill-suited to manage the complex demands of the space industry, raising questions about the future of projects like the Space Launch System. Unlike Starliner, SLS has a cost-plus contract structure, allowing Boeing to shift any cost overruns to the customer, making it more financially appealing for the company to maintain. However, Starliner's losses, while significant, are relatively minor when compared to Boeing's overall financial challenges, suggesting that the space program, whether profitable or not, has minimal impact on Boeing's broader financial health. But here's the critical point. You know what that is? Starliner represents Boeing's face in the space technology industry. It's a high-profile project with a reputation that reflects on the United States, especially when compared to other space powers like Russia or China. When NASA awarded the Commercial Crew Program contracts back in 2014, Boeing was a well-established giant, while SpaceX was an emerging company. Back in 1969, 3 astronauts landed on the moon via the Apollo 11 mission, propelled by the first-stage booster of the Saturn V rocket that was built by Boeing. Starliner, first conceptualized in 2010, drew inspiration from this legacy, yet has struggled to live up to it, causing Boeing's space ambitions to get off track. Therefore, Boeing still has reason to push forward with Starliner, at least to fulfill NASA's contracts for the 6 missions to the ISS. While there's not yet been an official announcement about the fate of Starliner's program, Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, seems to be hinting at a realignment of the company's commercial ops. Let's dive into what that reveals. Ortberg, who took on the CEO role in August, believes it's time for Boeing to consider scaling back on certain loss-making areas and adjusting how they pursue new business opportunities. Former CEO Dave Calhoun stated last year that Boeing would no longer engage in fixed-price development contracts. "I think we're better off doing less and doing it well rather than doing more and doing it poorly," Ortberg commented. We're in the process of evaluating our portfolio, which is something a new CEO always does when stepping into a business. It appears that everything's being meticulously calculated by this new CEO, who seems to be fully aware of every detail of the company's progress, even earning a commendation from Elon in a tweet. The new Boeing CEO spends time in the factory and understands engineering, which are big improvements. Hopefully he turns around a once great company. Though that remains to be seen, Ortberg's upcoming actions will demonstrate it all. Boeing's primary financial losses in third quarter of this year stemmed from its commercial aircraft sector. Concerns over the 737 MAX's safety and a workers' strike have halted production at many of Boeing's aircraft plants, making this the worst quarter for Boeing since the peak of the COVID pandemic back in 2020. Even before the strike, the FAA restricted the production rate of the 737 MAX, limiting revenue for the commercial aircraft business. Ortberg hasn't specified which programs Boeing may consider scaling down or even discontinuing, but did confirm that the company's core business areas, commercial airplanes and military systems, will stay intact. There are probably some fringe areas where we could be more efficient or that may divert us from our main objectives. More to come on that, he said. I don't have a definitive list yet of what we'll keep or phase out. This is all part of an ongoing evaluation. Aside from technical challenges, Ortberg identified miscalculations in cost and risk assessments as reasons for Boeing's underperformance on some fixed-price government contracts, including Starliner. However, he did clarify that Boeing wouldn't abandon every troubled contract. Even if we wanted to, I don't think we simply walk away from these contracts, he explained. These are critical customers who need our capabilities. We have long-term commitments with them, so walking away isn't an option here. Still, Ortberg added that Boeing might reevaluate its involvement in programs as they transition from one contract phase to another. NASA's commercial crew contract with Boeing, valued at up to $4.6 billion, assumes that the agency will approve Boeing for 6 operational Starliner missions. So far, however, NASA's only given the green light for Boeing to prepare for 3 of those missions. The second half of the commercial crew contract remains uncertain and could provide an opportunity for Boeing to reassess Starliner without breaching their commitments to NASA. This is particularly relevant as NASA plans to retire the ISS by the end of the decade, and it's unclear if Boeing could complete all 6 Starliner missions while alternating with SpaceX for crew transport duties. Despite this, Ortberg has stated, "I don't think a wholesale walkaway is on the table." This suggests Boeing isn't likely to stop Starliner immediately. But when questioned about the program's future direction, Boeing has yet to outline specific plans or even confirm its intention to continue with the project, raising more questions. This creates a bit of a dilemma for NASA, which remains interested in certifying Boeing's Starliner spacecraft as the second commercial option for getting astronauts to orbit. A primary objective for NASA's commercial crew program, set over a decade ago, was to develop 2 independently certified crew transport systems for LEO. The aim was to encourage competition to lower costs and ensure a backup option if one provider encountered difficulties. However, NASA hasn't yet decided whether it'll still require Boeing to complete another test flight to reach certification with Starliner. The agency is also exploring options for an unmanned Starliner mission to transport cargo to the ISS next year, potentially as means to validate modifications to the spacecraft's propulsion system following issues encountered in this year's test flight. NASA appears to be proceeding on the assumption that Boeing remains in the game, with astronauts continuing to train for Starliner's first orbital mission, though that's unlikely before late next year, 2026. Earlier this month, NASA announced that SpaceX would fly a 4-person crew to the ISS no sooner than July of next year, occupying a slot the agency had once hoped Boeing would fill. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson told reporters in late August that he received assurances from Ortberg that Boeing intends to move forward and fly Starliner in the future. At that time, Ortberg was only a few weeks into his role at Boeing. And that's it for today's episode.